Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of TADA Talks. My name is Todd Bourgon. I'm the Executive Director of the TADA. Today's podcast is sponsored by Kijiji Autos. I am joined today by Petrina Gentile. I am excited to have Petrina join us today. She has so much automotive knowledge, whether it's on new vehicles that are in market or vehicles that are coming to market. And also, I would like to speak to Petrina about how she sees her role as being an influential female in our industry. So, without further ado, I would like to say welcome to Petrina. Hi, Petrina. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you, Todd?
Well, I'm doing well. As we were just talking offline, I think we're both enjoying the heat, but we're not going to complain as much about it as we probably could because next thing you know, it'll be January. We'll be complaining about how we want to get down south, right?
Oh, you're absolutely right.
So, thank you for joining us today. I was actually excited to have you on because you're a little bit of a step in a different direction than what we've had on for the last little while. We've been talking to people about heavy stuff, HR and legal issues and COVID and all these things. And I thought this was a great departure to actually talk about cars and the automotive industry and some other things. So thanks for joining me today. And let me start off by just asking you, for those that may not know you, you've been around a while through our industry, but also done a number of events with the TADA. But what do you do, as an automotive journalist? Maybe talk to me a little bit about, how you're involved in the industry and the types of mediums that people can find you on. Let's start there.
Sure, that sounds good. I've been basically an automotive journalist since about 2004. And I've been working for the Globe and Mail's Drive section and also for CTV. I have my own segment called Up to Speed that's on bi-weekly on CTV News Channel right across Canada. I also cover the automotive beat for CHCH TV, BNN Bloomberg, CP24, so a number of TV outlets. And my job is basically never the same every day, which I love. I don't think I could do a 9-to-5 office job. So before the pandemic, I traveled quite a bit, traveled all over the world, test driving everything from Lamborghinis in the Italian Alps to Bentleys in Oman, to off-roading in Land Rovers in the Colorado's Great Divide, and all in the name of work. So I basically travel all over the world, test drive vehicles, write about them for the Globe and Mail, and then report on them for TV. So I have a phenomenal job. It is, I know I've heard it a million times, every man's dream job. And it's never felt like a day of work, to be honest with you. It's been quite a ride. Things are changing though, as you know, as you're experiencing too with the pandemic. But it is it makes you sort of appreciate what you had, and it gives you kind of a little bit of time to kind of relax and stay home in your own bed for a change.
Yeah, no, that's one thing that certainly for the first couple of months, I used to travel quite a bit, as you know, and the first couple of months were great. It was like you're at home, and then after that routine got a little bit old. I like the old routine that I had a lot better, that's for sure. So yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that you've got a job that you love and you can get paid for it. In some respects, I have a dealer that told me, he says, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. He goes, I come to work every day, and he says, and I love coming to work. And he says, and the benefit is, he says, I get paid to do it. And, that's kind of, I think that's nirvana for a lot of people in terms of a career. So good for you. We've all seen change because of COVID, so we'll talk briefly about that. But in your capacity, as a journalist and as a media person, you talked a little bit about you're not traveling, so that's certainly your role's changed there. But have you seen it change in terms of how you have to either communicate or, your role then with the OEM because of COVID and the lockdowns? Is there anything specific that you see that has changed to either the bad or to the good?
Yeah, it's definitely changed, certainly during the pandemic. And I give them, all credit for being able to, to change with this new world that we're living in. So what you have now is you have events that are social distance events. You have drives, and instead of driving with a partner, which you would do in the past, now you drive the vehicle by yourself. So many manufacturers are doing events, local events in the Ontario area, where that, you know, Quebec journalists can come, and some people even from BC are flying into them. So they've been very good in terms of adjusting what the program looks like and having smaller groups. And I have to say, I kind of almost prefer it, because sometimes in the past you'd have these really large groups of journalists and you wouldn't have enough driving time in a vehicle. Now you have a lot of time driving a vehicle and you're by yourself, and it's a nice way to still connect with the car, because we had such a period of time where there weren't any press launches. So now, you know, I did the Ford Bronco off-roading in Bowmanville about 2 weeks ago. So again, it was a very small group, 5 journalists, you know, 1 vehicle per person. I have the Lexus NX. It's a static display event that they did in Kingston. The Tundra's coming up. It's again a static display. So basically it's the vehicle, you go in, you talk to the people, the engineers and product planners about the vehicle. You get a presentation. You don't necessarily drive it sometimes. So they've adjusted well in terms of giving us enough content to still be able to write about these vehicles and what's new and what's coming out. So it's not like it was in the past, but it is at least a step in the right direction and a step into normalcy, I guess.
No, and I mean, I think that's great, because, you know, one thing that we've learned from some of the studies we've been involved in, both like very recently, like last week and even the last couple of months, is that there's a ton of pent up consumer demand for vehicles. And, you know, a lot of it's driven by the fact that we were not wide open. I mean, the good news is that in Ontario anyways, is that we never really closed down. We were shut down for a very brief period of time. And the second piece obviously is the infamous microchips that have delayed a lot of vehicles getting in consumers' hands, but we definitely know there's a lot of pent up demand for purchase. So we are all hoping and praying for a strong Q4. So I'm glad to see that no one's taken their foot off the gas on the other side in terms of making sure consumers are aware. And I mean, you're right, there is a benefit that when they put you in a Lambo or a real high-end vehicle and you don't have somebody else beside you, you can probably take yourself on a little bit different ride and just say, I'm sorry that slipped, right?
Yeah, exactly. No one needs to know any better.
That's right. So let's shift topics a little bit. One of the things that we last physically saw each other, I think, was at Auto Show February 2020 in Toronto. And who would have known 3 weeks later where we all would have ended up as a society. But you hosted an event at that show called the Women in Automotive event, which I thought was spectacular in terms of the turnout and the support we have. So you did an incredible job representing the industry, and I certainly just thought, well, I have you, let me pick your brain a little bit. I mean, obviously a lot of things with COVID got put on the side burner. The in-person activities didn't really take place. Schools have certainly been closed for the most part. So, you know, from where we were in February to where we are today, like, what's your perspective on where we are at as an industry with trying to attract women and showing this as an industry that is a viable place for them to shine in terms of their talents?
There's still work to be done. You know, I think it's getting better, and it's certainly a lot more difficult. Like I loved the event that you hosted in 2020. It was fantastic. It was just such a great way to connect with other women and to meet new people and to get inspired by other women. And it's so nice when you're in person. You really kind of the vibe is totally different in person. And like you say, because of the pandemic, things certainly shifted. But what I have seen, which I really like, is the fact that many OEMs, many companies are still doing women's events online. I just did one 2 weeks ago for Women in Automotive, and that is done by the Cherokee Media Group in the US. And it was a 2-day event geared towards women as well, and really kind of encouraging women to break barriers and very inspirational. Nissan has done something similar where I've talked and shared my story with women that worked within Nissan. Hyundai has had a similar event with their women at HAC, which is Hyundai Auto Canada Corporation. And again, it's a group of women that are part of the company, and it's all about, you know, promoting women. And they did an event online, and I was the guest speaker for it and just sharing my story about how things have changed. So I'm really thrilled that and even, you know, your podcast here, you know, the Talks podcast, this is a great way to still connect with people, to talk to people, because this is sort of our last resort before things hopefully open up soon. So I'm really happy to see that there are still efforts being made to try to connect with women, to try to get us together and get men on board supporting us as well. So I do see that, you know, despite the pandemic, we are making some strides, and we haven't really given up on still trying to encourage women to get into the auto industry. It is a phenomenal industry, and it's too bad that more women aren't applying to more jobs. You know, last week when we were talking about the Women in Automotive Conference, you know, I mentioned one of the stats. When it comes to a job application, women won't apply unless they have 100% of the qualifications, but a man will apply if he has 60% of the qualifications. So it's just trying to build women's confidence and getting them to apply to leadership roles in automotive, because there are so many great opportunities. And it's a very lucrative business, you know, it can really pay off in the end.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I didn't know that stat was as wide as it is, 60 to 100% in terms of qualifications, because, you know, in my past, I mean, fortunately, I haven't had to look for a job for a long time, but and don't plan on it anytime soon, but is that, you know, I looked at, hey, if they're asking for 20 things, like there is no perfect person. So if I have 16, I'm still going to throw my name in the hat, right? So yeah, maybe it's just a matter of, again, as we connect is provide that information and make that connection. But yeah, like I am glad that we're able to have a dialogue on our podcast and provide this, you know, back to our members. But I can't wait to get back to in-person events. And I know that anyone that I speak to on my board, it's the exact same thing. Like the events that we once maybe took for granted in terms of, geez, we got to go to this, we got to go to that, we got to fly to this. I'll never complain again. I can't, the value of being in person and building those relationships has been taught to us, I think, in a big way, that you can only do so much on a Zoom. So I'm glad that you're still seeing some progression to that. And we will, as an association, always be a voice of making sure that people know that it is a viable industry, and certainly women play a big part in that. And as we get back to our next auto show, that will definitely be a product that you'll see at our show, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Great! I can't wait.
I mean, you could pick a million things, because I could feed you a million things, but I won't. So maybe just pick one or two things that you see that are challenges for our industry, and they don't have to be specific to COVID. They can be something that's totally unrelated. They could be certainly anything current or something moving forward, but just give me from your perspective. You are more intertwined with the OEMs and when you're doing your media events and things like that. What do you see for some of our challenges? And maybe you don't see as many challenges, maybe you see more opportunities. I'm open to both.
Okay, well, electrification, one of them. I think this is going to be a huge challenge moving forward. Especially with you have so many different push by the governments, Canada saying, we want to be zero emission by 2035, and following suit of so many other countries that are hoping for zero emission vehicles if you look at Norway, 2025, very ambitious. And I applaud it. I mean, it's certainly, a step in the right direction. This is where the industry is going, but there's still so much work that has to be done. When you look at 100% zero emission vehicles by 2035, and the current rate is 5% of new vehicle sales were EVs in Q1. So how do you go from that to 100% in less than 15 years? I think there's a lot of challenges with that, in terms of building the infrastructure, getting consumers on board with paying the premium, because there's certainly a premium to pay for driving an electric vehicle. The charging, there's so much that needs to be done. Getting the price of the batteries down. The batteries are like 30% of the cost of an electric vehicle. So I think that's going to be a big challenge to meet this. And like I say, selling them to consumers, getting them to jump on board the electric bandwagon, because this is the way everything's going. I think this is going to be a big challenge for us, but it's an exciting time. This is the most exciting time in the auto industry that we've ever seen. So that is certainly a challenge. And then of course, automation. I think that's going to be a big challenge moving forward. We've seen a lot of issues with Tesla vehicles, for example, and the autopilot systems. I think there were 750 some odd thousand vehicles that are now being investigated by the IIHS in the US over vehicles that are slamming into emergency parked vehicles. So there's a lot of work to be done too on that automation and just all the challenges it brings with everything, with the industry. What happens with everything, just our cities. There's just so many challenges that lie ahead. But like I say, it to me is such an exciting time, because we've never seen so many changes like we have now.
Yeah, you brought up some big bombs there. Those are some pretty big points. No, this is good. It's what we want to talk about in some respects. So yeah, it's I don't know how you are. I mean, I wouldn't buy a Tesla to have the car drive. I'd buy a car to drive it. I mean, maybe I'm old school. And if I'm not going to drive it, truthfully, I'm going to take an Uber because, I don't, I don't want to be the one that has that responsibility of technology screws up. So yeah, maybe there's some work. That's a very good example. So on electrification. So I just finished a few weeks ago, a mini tour of the province. I couldn't obviously do the whole province because it's not physically possible, but hopped in the motorhome and went and visited a bunch of dealers, and just to get a perspective of what's going on in their worlds. And you hear about the microchip shortage, and then you see some dealers' parking lots, and you go, holy geez, this is scary. But one of them, when you talk about electrification, you hit on a few, I think, very solid points. Infrastructure doesn't get talked about a lot. And it's one thing to see, 15 charging stations for a Tesla at, 400 in at Mapleview by the mall. But there's over 3,000 gas stations in Canada. And if our goal is 2035, which I think is a big, lofty goal, and the number of 5% adaptation that you gave, I think, is a national number. Ontario's is much lower in terms of penetration. My point is that up north, out of the urban areas, and north doesn't have to be Timmins or Thunder Bay. I mean, north can be, North Bay, or something 2.5 hours out of Toronto. The infrastructure and the distance to travel just for some everyday living is very, very different. And some of these cities we take for granted that we have a Costco around the corner. Well, they may take a trip to Costco or Walmart once a month, and then literally buy a month's worth of stuff because they just can't get the same sort of items that they want in their locale. And those distances right now, in a lot of cases, are not conducive to what we're getting out of battery life and charging infrastructure. So I would say you're 100% bang on that. The other that doesn't get talked about a lot is cost to the dealer. So one of the dealers that I spoke to, he was in the process of having his power system at the dealership switched over at his drive-through so he can charge vehicles for the 3 brands that they have underneath their roof. And it was going to cost him, I think he said, just a little bit shy of $500,000.
Wow.
Right. And so, yes, there's programs in place. And yes, I know that there's in some cases some manufacturer participation, but I just think there's a lot of conversation that has to take place on that whole topic. And the ugliest one that no one wants to talk about, and I'm a big believer in talking about reality, is that there's not a few $100,000 of tax dollars that come out of a gas pump every year. There's billions. and millions, and that number and those dollars go into supporting public transit and municipalities and other infrastructures. So I think there's a lot of open discussion that has to be places. How is that getting replaced? Where is that coming from? So you bring up some great points, and I think that certainly, I'm not against electrification. I'm all for a greener world, but I really think that there's a whole lot of conversation that has to take place, and just those 2 points you brought up just speak to that in volume. So we're tight on time, because obviously I don't want to run a long podcast that people turn you off, that's for sure. So let me end on a kind of a funny note, or I guess a satirical note, depending on what you tell me. So I always ask people before I finish off, what was your first car that you bought? What's the make, the model, and why did you buy that specific car?
I bought on my own, a 1981 Chevy Cavalier, a coupe in blue. And I have to be honest, it was a tough go for me to buy my first car. And I was really excited about it. I was just so thrilled. I just finished university. I was going off to grad school to study journalism. And I was making my, my second biggest purchase in my lifetime. And I did all my research, and, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted. And, back in the day, like 25 years ago, no, I guess even more than that, you had to actually do research. You had to go to a library and do research. And it was, I got Phil Edmonston's Lemonade Guides and looked up all the different vehicles. But as a young woman in my early 20s, it was really difficult to test drive a vehicle. I would go to a dealership, and I wasn't even allowed to drive the car. They would put me in the passenger seat, and they would drive the vehicle for me, and then ask me, do you want to buy it? And I'm like, well, no, I need to drive it. I would go to another dealership, and I'd ask them for, the bottom of the line vehicle, and they would say, oh, it's out. And I'd say, oh, can I take the next vehicle up? No, it's not in your budget. So it was really difficult. And I sort of settled on the Cavalier because my brother-in-law knew somebody at this particular dealership, and he helped me sort of close the deal. So it was a little bit of a traumatic experience buying my first car, because I had so much expectations on the, having my first set of wheels and being able to go to Ottawa and drive myself back and forth from grad school. And yeah, it didn't really kind of shape up when it came to actually purchasing it. But having said that, it was a great car, and I drove it for, I think about 14 years. Ended up selling it to a woman that lived in Fonthill. She was a school bus driver, and it was really hard to part with it, because this was a vehicle, like I say, I took it to grad school. It came with me on, work terms, on my first work term at CTV as a news writer in the middle of the night, driving at 1 a.m. to get to my shift that started at 3 a.m. So it was a fantastic little car, like perfect for me at that time. But it was a little bit difficult. I'm glad to say things are changing, though. It's
funny is that the story you just told, I think, is so important that it's told, because I don't think there's a lot of people in the industry today that say would be new to the industry that would believe that you could have that type of experience in our industry ever. And, if that's what you experienced back, in that time, I think it's important to remember, A, we can never go back there, and B, not only did these things take place, but every single piece of data that we have today now demonstrates that females make more decisions on the largest purchases than males do, in many respects. And so, boy, oh boy, were we ever out to lunch on that terms of thinking. So, good for you for persevering. So.
Yeah, and you know what? And I will say, I did buy my next car. It took me a long time, because I actually went and bought a car. I bought used vehicles after that, all privately, but I did manage to make it back into the dealership last year, right before COVID hit, and bought a used vehicle at a dealer. And it was a totally different experience. It was a great experience. And I loved the dealership and the guy that I dealt with. And it made it very, very simple and very easy. And it was totally a different experience, because that really shaped my experience that first time around. So I'm glad to see things have changed. And you are absolutely right. Women account for more than, I think it's more than 85% of all car buying decision making when it comes to a vehicle. So it's really important to target them and make them feel special and important because they're the ones paying for the vehicles, right?
I couldn't agree more with you. So listen, I want to say thank you so much for giving me your time today. And I'm sorry that we don't have more time, but hopefully you understand. I encourage you to, we can hopefully do this again sometime. I can't wait to see you live, where we can do another event for women in automotive at one of our auto shows. But I'd also like to take this moment to thank our good friends at Kijiji Autos, who have sponsored the podcast today so that I could sit and have a nice chat with you. And I'd also like to thank you, Petrina, for being a great ambassador representing our industry, and the way that you certainly handle yourself and the passion that you have. I think it's fantastic, and we need more of you. So thank you so much for joining me again today. I wish you well and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. This was so much fun. I can't believe how fast half an hour goes. Thanks so much.
This is Todd Bourgon signing off for this edition of TADA Talks.